Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Empathy Podcast. My name's Leanne Butterworth, and today we're speaking with Ainslee Hooper about empathy and disability inclusion. So we're going to learn all about how we can better include people with a disability to make them really feel heard, valued, and visible, to not only improve their mental health, but also the community and the businesses with whom we all interact. So it's a really interesting discussion today with Ainslee from Ainslee Hooper Consulting about disability inclusion. My name's Leanne Butterworth, and you can find me at empathyfirst.com.au. This is the Empathy Podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Empathy Podcast. Now, my name's Leanne Butterworth, and today I'm speaking to Ainslee Hooper. I was going to say consulting, but Ainslee Hooper.
Hi.
How are you, Ainslee?
Yeah, good, Leanne. How about yourself?
Well, thank you. And today, Ainslee, we're going to talk about empathy and disability and inclusion. So how to be more inclusive, how to learn more about the disability space and really get it right or get it better. I think some of us are trying, we're not getting it right. Let's talk about what we can do to be a more disability inclusive society, business, and individual. So welcome, Ainslee. Do you want to tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Firstly, thank you for having me on. Hi, everyone. I'm Ainslee Hooper. I own Ainslee Hooper Consulting. So I am an anthropologist and disability inclusion consultant. I help businesses understand disability, remove invisible barriers in order to reduce the risk of ableism or disability discrimination.
When you say invisible barriers, what do you mean?
So when I talk about invisible barriers, these are the barriers that exist that people and they're invisible because people don't know that they exist, and that's because of the privilege that they've held. So when I talk about privilege, a lot of people think, oh, I'm not privileged. They think it's an insult or a bad thing. It's not. It's just because you haven't faced something, you don't realise it's a barrier. So basically, I help businesses identify those things that they're not necessarily. They don't realise that consumers are actually having problems with those things because they've never had to even think about those things in the first place. Like a very, very good example for me, like so I'm a wheelchair user. Okay. And this is one I use a lot. But for example, trying to find a hair salon that has an accessible basin, that's actually a big problem. It took me, when my old salon closed down, it took me 3 months to find another one which I could access in my town. So that's a huge thing. So and speaking to salon owners, they didn't even realise that was an issue. It wasn't that they weren't being discriminatory. They just didn't even think about it. So it's those kind of things.
Yeah, gotcha. And I mean, the way that I look at privilege is a lack of hurdles in your lane.
Yes, I like that.
So some people didn't even know there were hurdles. So it's not about the prize at the end. It's about the lack of hurdles in your lane. And sometimes hurdles that we don't even think about are things like gender or your level of ability or the colour of your skin or the suburb that you grew up in or parental, let's say, divorce, things like that. So it's not that there's a prize at the end, but it's the lack of hurdles in your lane that meant that you are better able to just take opportunities without even thinking about it.
Exactly.
So what sort of businesses are actually engaging you these days?
Oh, so I'm getting a wide range of businesses. So I've been working with councils. I've been working with disability service providers. I've also been working with sustainability services firms, looking at disability action plans. So I'm getting, and even private, even public venues. I've been engaged by them to help ensure that the experiences of people with disabilities coming into their venues is one that's barrier free. So like I get a wide range of wide range of work.
So then when we talk about disability, let's go into a few definitions for a second. So we'll define disability for a start, because my head starts ticking over and I think, wow, there are so many are we allowed to use the word disability? Let's start there. Is it
Yeah.
okay for us to say the word disability? And I mean us as the
Mhm.
people who have never really thought about this before.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And it's a really funny thing that I love this topic because I myself, okay, so I have a disability. I myself, when I was younger, had a huge problem with the word disability because I saw it as such a negative thing, as in, that's with the stereotypes, and I did not want to be related to those stereotypes.
Yep.
Then as I got older, I realised there's nothing wrong with disability. It's the problem, it's the stigma that's been attached to it
Gotcha.
by society that made it seem like a bad word, and it's not. So it's the society's it's the meaning needs to be changed because disability is not a problem at all. And so now when I talk to other people and I hear people use different abilities or disabilities, those kind of things, I get very, very my back gets fired up about those because it's like, no, say disability.
Okay.
The problem is not us, it's society, and that needs to change.
Do you think people are afraid of the word disability?
Yeah. So, absolutely. So, I actually, it's an interesting one. I found a lot of people, a lot of parents of children with disabilities, I find, have a problem with the word. I don't know why that is. I mean, I'm not a parent myself, so I can't actually speak to that, but I find that's an interesting one. So they're always trying to get out. I see a lot of conversations online about trying to get away from the word disability in those contexts. And for me, I worry about the children because I feel like that's a bad thing to try and push onto your children. That it's something that you should be like getting away from. Yeah.
So I guess if we quickly define empathy and then come back to this, because there are three types of empathy. And the reason I'm coming back to this is I think when we talk to people, because I remember there was a LinkedIn post and we talked about disability and some people said it was fine, some people said it's not fine. The definition of empathy that I use is the ability to share and understand the feelings of another person and respond appropriately. So I guess in this scenario, we can't lump together everybody and every disability into one word.
Yes.
So I guess it's listening to that individual. So if there is a parent who says, please don't use that word, you have to respect it for that individual, or somebody who says, I'm sight impaired, please don't say I'm disabled. So is that advice that applies in this situation?
Yes, so I definitely think disability pronouns is important. For example, and this is one of the things that I do some training for disability service providers to help their Cert 4 and disability students who are wanting to go out into the disability support workforce. And I say, because I get a lot of people who ask me, what word should I use when I'm referring to talking to someone with a disability? And I'm saying, well, I say these are the general preferred terms, overall. However, it's up to the individual as to what they want to be, how they want to be referred to. So, or as. Ask the person. So, basically just ask the person how they would like to be referred to and go with that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because the other types of empathy that we look at, the first one is emotional empathy, which is feeling the feelings. So you feel sad, I feel sad, we all feel sad together. Cognitive empathy, which is me putting myself in your shoes, but there's often a lot of assumptions in that.
Yes.
And I think that's potentially where the danger can come in. So I don't often talk about cognitive empathy because I think danger can come in is if you start making assumptions of, I think I know what you want. I think I know what you're feeling because I'm grouping together everybody with a disability, as opposed to that compassionate empathy space, which is listening to what they've told you as their experience and then deferring to them for their preferences.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I find that quite a lot, and funnily enough, it comes from the disability sector. I find that one because they're wanting to do a good job, And so what they'll then do is that they'll come in and they'll assume that they know what you're going to want to try and make things easier. But the problem with that is that they haven't actually asked, and therefore it complicates the things. So you've got to correct and say, no, this is actually what I want. So I do find that that's actually quite commonplace in the disability sector.
Yeah, that happens a lot, where people go, well, I've done this particular course, so I know what it's like to be you, or even I've experienced that, so I know what it's like to be you. You go, no, you don't.
No,
you don't.
I had a conversation the other day with someone so I'm actually at the moment I'm sitting in an electric wheelchair because I broke my leg recently.
Oh no!
And so I'd spent 3.5 weeks in the hospital, and then I'm finally getting out of this brace tomorrow, which will be 8 weeks. But anyway, and so I was on the phone to someone, and they're like, "Oh, I know exactly how you feel," and I'm just like, I just was like, no, I've got to keep nice and calm. Don't want to blast them, but it's like you do not know how I feel. You do not know you don't know what this is like at all. So yeah.
And that's such a toxic statement. It has lovely intentions,
absolutely,
but it comes across so condescending. And that's I think that seems to be the space that we're both in, is people have good intentions, but they just need that help in getting the translation, getting the communication piece, getting the adaptability piece, so that we can actually be more inclusive. So when you talk about disability and being a disability consultant, do you focus on physical disability? Do we look at mental disability? Do we look at sight, sound, hearing?
So
is it everything? How is that? Feels big.
Yeah, so for me, I'm only going to talk about things that I know. So I have a physical disability. I'm a wheelchair user and don't walk, so I'm paraplegic. So I'm only going to talk about disability really from either a social perspective or from what my experience is. I'm not going to talk about anything to do with someone being deaf or blind or whatever, because I've got no idea what anything that's like. So I stay away from those kind of things. I only talk about my experience, and it's social barriers that are commonplace throughout the disability community.
Yeah. And I think that's important for businesses as well, when we are looking at, let's say, disability, to not lump everybody in together. And so there are so many different types that it can, I'm guessing, feel overwhelming at times, but it's bringing in experts like yourself to say, well, what's your experience? And then listening to that experience and bringing in people who are blind or deaf, or I'm going to say have mental health issues, if that's the space that you're designing for. Yeah. But it always comes down to co-design.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things with one of the projects I worked on, I did ask them, when they engaged me, I did ask them, had they actually consulted other people? And they was like, no, I hadn't even thought about doing that. And I said, well, yeah, I can't say for sure that, everything is going to be ticked off here, because I'm only doing it from my perspective, and I'm not going to even judge how it might be for somebody else, because I'm just going to miss things, and it's not going to work for anybody.
Yeah. And again, it's that deferring to the people who know.
Exactly right. Yep.
So then when we're having these conversations, and we're going to talk a little bit about generally what businesses can do to be more inclusive, but why is this a conversation that we need to have? Because I don't think it's ever crossed people's minds. So what are the benefits of businesses actually getting this right?
Oh, money. That's the biggest one. Okay, so looking at it this way, for businesses, 1 in 5 people have a disability, so that could be 1 in 5. So if you haven't designed for inclusion and ensured that your place is accessible and inclusive, then you're missing out on one in every 5 consumers coming through your door. So that's a huge whopping price tag to cut out. So you really, and remember as well that people with disabilities, there'll be invisible disabilities. So you've probably already. When people will say, "Oh, I don't have people with disabilities coming into my shop or whatever," go online. It's like, well, how do you know that? You actually don't know that because you don't know that you don't know about the invisible disabilities. So therefore, making sure that you're designing for everybody, that's the best way to go for you and the consumer.
What are the consequences of getting this wrong? Apart from money, like not for the business, but for the disability community?
Okay, so that's huge. Well, I will say that the Australian Human Rights Commission, the complaints that they've received in the last financial year, disability discrimination was the highest, which means all things like not being able to get into businesses, not being able to access communities, whatever. And that's been the same for like the last 3 years. So from the disability community's perspective, it basically feels like we are not included. And that has a huge impact on people with disabilities, isolation and just mental health, just being reminded that, you're still not included. One interesting thing that I learned recently was that we've got the feminist movement. So with the feminist movement, people with disabilities are 40 years behind the feminist movement in Australia, and we're a further 10 years behind Aboriginal Australians in equality. So that's like huge. I'm 43, and to think that basically for my whole life I haven't been equal. That's huge. Yeah, huge. Yeah, it's a hard thing to think about. Yeah.
And I think that's where the emergence of intersectional feminism is coming from. It's not just about white women at the board table. It's now like ableism and racism and all of those things are coming together to go, no, we lift one, we lift all.
Yeah, absolutely.
We cannot leave people behind in this.
No.
So, and that's really the purpose of today, is to bring an awareness to people who are disabled, who, like you said, are often left by the wayside. They're not considered. They're not even part of the discussion. And say, okay, well, what is it that we can do as a society to be more inclusive? So yes, it's designing programs and bringing in consultants like yourself and others who are working in that space. And we've said how important it is and how valuable it is, not only to the business, yes, it's money, but also to people in the disabled community to feel included and valued and visible and heard, which is really the goal of empathy.
Yes.
As a general rule, what sort of things can we do, let's say as individual? Let's start there. As individuals, what can we do?
Yeah, so that's a really hard one to answer. As individuals, what can we do? I talk about experiences and stuff and things like that to raise awareness that way. And there's just like so many people who are now basically going, oh, okay, yeah, I understand what you're going through now because I've either gone through it now or had family going through it. So as individuals, it's sort of really, really hard to really say what we can do. I mean, it's a systemic issue for me. One of the big things I do not like and I'd like to see rid of is the diversity targets. I'm not sure about what you think about those, but I cannot stand seeing for employees, for example, have listed we employ, say, 3% of people with disabilities. It's like, that to me is just a tokenistic thing. So therefore they'll hire 3% of people with disabilities, but then what are they going to do inside the organisation to actually make it feel like it's an inclusive space? Like, for example, where I used to work, and so where I used to work, there were certain things when I was off sick that I wasn't able to do, whereas if that had been the case during COVID, I would have been able to do it. So with remote working, all that kind of stuff, that was not possible when I wasn't able to work. I mean, at this time, I was mentally fine. I could have actually worked. from home if that had been available. But yeah, it's not until the majority are affected that those kind of changes are made. So yeah, I feel like it's a systemic thing, and it needs to work both ways. Like I don't know how to answer how do we do it as individuals, but yeah, it needs to work both ways. It needs to come from the top and also needs to be at the bottom. For example, I'm not sure if you know about the Anne Marie Smith who died in South Australia last year. And I think of Anne Marie Smith and the house that she lived in, and I saw a photo of it, and it's a house it's a beautiful house in a suburb, unlike my own that I'm living in now. And to think, so she had neighbours, and the neighbours obviously didn't know anything about her. I just can't understand how that was able to happen when you're part of a community. So I think, going back to that question now, I think that it needs to become part of the community. The community needs to think about ensuring, and this is talking about inclusion. The community needs to make sure that everything is inclusive. And going back to the business conversation, they may not think that there's people with disabilities living in their community, but yep, we are. And so ensuring not waiting for someone to have to point out, look, I can't get in there. Start thinking about these things. Like I understand that people can't think about things that they haven't experienced themselves. It's going to be hard, but it needs to become more integrated so that we're actually thinking about these things from the get-go.
Yeah. And I mean, that's a big answer. Because it is so systemic and it is so ingrained, and I think there's multiple levels. I think there are changes that individuals can make to be more empathetic. And part of that is listening and opening your mind and opening your heart and not making assumptions that we think we know what people are going through, or that we think that what we're doing is best. So actually opening our mind that there are people with different experiences to ours, that we're allowed to ask questions, that we're allowed to be curious, that we're allowed to be inclusive. And if we don't know what to say or we don't know what to do, that's okay too, but you defer to the person who does know.
Yes.
And I think it's that opening of our mind and opening of our eyes that people with disabilities are human. They are not their disability. They are human, and deferring to them when they say, I want to be referred to as this, or this is my experience, or even to me, following people, like I follow Spencer to the West. He doesn't have a lower half of his body. He is sensational. I love him. But he talks about what changes we can make as individuals to make people with disability feel heard, valued, and visible. And it's deferring to people and not making assumptions or having expectations or not judging people because they don't meet some level of ability that you think people should have. To me, on a personal level, when we talk about empathy training, and the reason I wanted to talk to you is even little things that we can do that would make people's lives easier is listen to their experience as a human.
And I guess the other thing is as well, don't get offended. Like, this is going to be really hard, but people have to. And I guess with the empathy thing, you probably know this better. But like, when people talk about their experiences, other people, like for example, when I talk about my experiences, I've had people get offended. Because, and I'm not, like, I wasn't actually talking to them about them doing anything wrong, but I was talking about my experiences. And they would get offended because it was making them uncomfortable. So I don't know if you saw, I posted on LinkedIn just the other day. It was 10 things to know about my ableist microaggressions. And so with that particular post, I sat on that post for about 2 weeks and hadn't written it because I was like, people are going to get really offended by this because
that's okay.
And so, and this is something that I've had to learn in my business, like, doing all this stuff now. Like, so I never used to talk about anything like this. So I used to just like cap it up and just like move on, So I just, go under the radar. So then I started doing all this stuff, and like even family, they were reading my posts and they're like, "Wow, I never knew you even experienced any of that." I was like, "Yeah," because I didn't want to make anybody feel uncomfortable by saying, "Well,
don't want to rock the boat."
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, so, so basically, if people can remember that when people are trying to tell you things, they're not trying to tell you things to make you feel bad. They're trying to tell you things so that you can learn from it and change. Yeah. I find that one a hard one to say, look, you may be offended by this, but don't be. It's hard.
No, I completely understand that, because to me that mentality is then they're putting their comfortableness, their comfort level over your humanity.
Yes.
And that's exactly. Not how it needs to go. You're explaining your humanity, your experience, your perspective. It's not aggressive. It's purely stating yours. But then because it makes them slightly uncomfortable because they don't quite understand it, they don't know what to do with it, that's when they take it personally instead of going, no, thank you, and showing gratitude that you're even sharing your experience.
Yeah, like there was one, and I hadn't actually put a label on it until someone said, well, that was actually assault. But a couple of years ago, I was waiting for a taxi outside of my university, and this guy walked along the street, and I think he'd had a few too many. And anyway, so I was moving over to get the taxi. This guy saw me and grabbed the back of my wheelchair and then just like thrust me towards the taxi driver, right?
Oh, no.
Yeah, and this was going over cobblestones. So, wheelchair fast over cobblestones is not a good idea.
No.
Yeah. So I was basically I knew this guy was drunk, and so I was just like, "No, come on, not going to try and tick him off or anything like that." I was like, "No, I'm fine, thank you." And then he wouldn't stop, so I just said, "No, fine, thank you." So I ended up grabbing a pole next to me, like a street sign, grabbed that and held onto that. And then, so the taxi driver didn't say anything because he was, I believe he was Sikh, and so he didn't want to obviously get any abuse, because he would have copped abuse, unfortunately, as well if he'd said anything. Yeah. So anyway, I retold the story to a girl group that I'm in on Facebook, and the response I got was, "Oh, he was just trying to help you."
Oh,
because I'm in a wheelchair. That anybody's trying to do that is obviously trying to help me. And it's like, well, no, it's actually, and when I told it to my friend the other day, she's like, "That's assault." And I was like, "Actually, you're right, it was assault." And but so there's that level of like expectation of, and that's an empathy thing as well. It's like, expectation of what a person with a disability should have to put up with as opposed to somebody else.
Absolutely. And even things like, to me, that assumption that disabilities are visible. So when people, we've seen on the news people who abuse people who are in parking spaces, or people who take disabled parking spaces, but people who say, well, you don't have a disability because you can't see it. And it's, in all honesty, none of their business.
Exactly right.
None of their business.
Yeah.
The other one that I've seen is where, let's say, and tell me if you've had this experience, where you'll be in a wheelchair next to somebody able-bodied, and whoever you're talking to will just address them. Have you had that?
All the time. So all the time. And it's like even so with my partner, doesn't have a disability, but if we go out anywhere, I'll talk, and then the person that's like, say for example at the shop, will then go to talk to him, and my partner just like wanders off, like just totally doesn't even register and wanders off, so the person has to speak to me. That happens all the time. And also there was one other experience that I thought was quite funny. I was with my friend having lunch one day, and everyone kept thinking she was my carer, which but look, this elderly woman walks up to her, And she's like, oh, she's got a great wheelchair, like pointing to me. And then so in the end, I just went, I kind of just leaned over the table and tried to get in this woman's like line of sight, like, and start talking to her. But like she totally just kept talking to my friend instead of me. I'm just like,
hello.
Yeah, I was like, I thought, and it's weird because it's kind of like, well, yeah, I understand that it's an older person, so they don't really think, you've got a brain, but yeah, so it happens that often that you actually get really empathetic and go, okay, look, I understand why that person's doing that, but it's still irritating.
But at the same time, I mean, I asked you a minute ago what individuals can do, and it feels like it's so part of your existence now. These microaggressions and these acts that it doesn't automatically come to your mind of what people can do to change. Whereas when I prompted you, you went, oh, yes, that, and yes, that. So it feels like it's just part of your daily life.
Yeah, exactly. So I've learnt. So like I said, I'm in my 40s now, so I've just learnt to just cop it, and really I shouldn't have to, but I have, like, even like these at the talks I was talking about earlier, where I for the cert for disability people that I do talks for, I talk about my experience growing up. Like, for example, like I born in the 70s, went to high school in the 80s, high school 90s, and like even things like, from that age, in primary school, they had me doing, like, when the other kids were doing bike ed, they had me sitting in a room doing typing, because I was going to be doing office work for the rest of my life. That was like, that was the direct. Well, I mean, I ended up doing office work for 20 years. But so like everything was just so ingrained that you kind of just like, go under the radar, as you said earlier, don't rock the boat. Everybody else obviously knows better than you do. Like, that's how I felt. Like, these are people who care for me, so therefore they must know what's better for me. And in reality, it's just like, no, it's because of the way they've been taught to think about disability. And that's why they were treating me the way they were treating me. Yeah.
So is there a way that you prefer, let's say, that people ask you about and start conversations about your disability? So if I was to ask, have you always been in a wheelchair? Is that nosy? Is it curious? Do you want to talk about it? Do you want people to ask? How do we have conversations about, or do we just pretend they're not there?
Don't pretend. It's really interesting. So this is my approach for me. Like, so I don't mind people saying, so why are you in a wheelchair? I prefer it, like, if I was to meet somebody for the first time, I don't like it in the first conversation generally. However, if that person builds up a rapport with me, and then they ask, I'm like, yeah, cool, I can tell you, that's fine. Like, I've done articles, like I've had journalists, spoken to journalists, and so they're like, oh, so what's your disability? And I'm like, I've learnt through the disability community that not to answer that question when it comes to that, because if I'm doing, if I'm doing an interview with a journalist about a certain topic, my disability shouldn't have to have anything to do with that particular topic. It's only if it's relevant to the topic that I'll talk about that disability, like that question. So basically, I mean, so to say, why are you in a wheelchair? I think that's an okay question to ask, as long as you've got a rapport with the person, or as long as it's pertinent to the conversation that you're having. So if it's just for their curiosity, then it's like, no, because that's so, like, it's nosy, basically. If you're asking somebody else about, like, about their health issues, so it's like, so, and I think it's interesting because disability seems like it's an open slather question, but whereas other things you certainly wouldn't ask people about. So that's an interesting one. And
I think it also comes back to, it's not the most interesting thing about you. It's not part of, it's not who you are.
Yes,
it's
exactly.
part of your experience. it's part of what makes up your experience and your physicality, let's say.
Yeah.
But it's not the most interesting thing about you, and it doesn't define you. Whereas I think a lot of people make this assumption that the disability defines the person. And I'm trying to get it across, especially in this podcast, of the humanity defines the person, their personality, their kindness defines the person.
Yeah,
the fact that their legs don't work, not the most interesting thing about them.
No, and this is so interesting. So, like, as I was saying earlier, how, like, I've only been working in this space for since 2019. So, and it seems like such a short time for, someone my age and who's got a disability. But it was so interesting. Like, I would come across so many people who, like, strangers, and they go, "Oh, you'd be perfect for that position." Why? Because you've got disability, disability. And it's like, wait a minute, you don't know anything about me. You don't know anything about my skills. So why would you assume that I actually be good for that position just because I've got a disability? Like, that to me was just like, but it was something that I would have, like, it would be so common. I'd meet someone, like, for example, like I require support workers in the morning, and I'd have someone for the first time, and that would be one of the things they'd say, like, you'd be great to work at the NDIS or whatever. And I'm like, why? Because you've got to, in a wheelchair. I'm like, okay, right. But actually, and like as I said, I'm an anthropologist. That's like, so with and that's what basically underpins all the kind of work I do. Is I use the anthropological skills to do that. It's really funny to me that people just go straight away disability. So I really didn't. I held off for a long time and fought the idea about doing anything disability related, but it wasn't until I started this job, and I started this work. I started this work because the more I had to engage disability services, the more of a gap I saw in the way people treated people with disabilities and the experiences people with disabilities had. And that's when I was like, no, that's just not on. There's something needs to be done there. But it wasn't just because I've got a disability, so I'm going to do this thing, because, I can cash in on it. That wasn't, totally not what I want to do.
No, not at all. And I mean, I work in the social enterprise space. I'm very passionate about social enterprise, and there are some amazing social enterprises who are specifically employing people with a disability. But that is very different to what you said before of people who just have a quota, who think it's the right thing to do, and it's this tokenistic gesture. So how do businesses then get that piece of the puzzle right? When we talk about designing, so customer inclusion and designing for disability, that's external. So when we're talking about internal inclusivity, what sort of, if it's not just saying we need 3%, we'll just get anybody and that'll tick our box, we can stick it in the annual report, and then they can just pull staples or something. How can businesses do the internal disability inclusion piece better?
I can only really talk from my experience as an employee. There's not enough people with disabilities in leadership positions. So that needs to change. Boards needs to have a person with a disability. And when I say that, I'm not just saying, because for representation, but it's obviously the right person for that board. But that needs to, anything around inclusion needs to include someone with a disability. Otherwise, it's not really doing inclusion right. And I guess that's where, when I got interested in the inclusion space, that's where I found it was just so lacking. And I thought, no. So you stop being scared about things and get people with disabilities in those positions and learn.
The language that I use, especially when teaching in social enterprises, we design with people, we don't design for people.
Yes, exactly right. So
we have to it's not some token gesture at the board table of, oh, you're ticking a box. It's no. How do we do this better? It's getting rid of that ivory tower mindset of I'm going to design for the people and my idea is the best for the people, as opposed to no, I'm going to get in there. We're going to design with people. And getting rid of language like those people. I hate the word. I deal with those people. I hate that language with a passion.
Yeah, like so many, like this is interesting. Like I was doing a search for quotes from people about quotes from people with disability, and instead of being able to find quotes from people with disabilities, I kept finding quotes about people with disabilities, and they were all people who didn't have a disability, and just giving all these inspirational quotes. And I'm just like, this is ridiculous, you know. Where's stop talking about us and talk with us and.
Exactly.
And our voices. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And by the sound of it, there is no downside to this. There is no downside to treating people like humans, listening to them. By the sound of it, you and I speak the same language. There are personal benefits across the board. There's being a better human and creating a better existence and experience for people who have a disability. There are business benefits. There are community benefits. There's mental health benefits. There is no downside.
No, and the other
being
thing
inclusive.
No, and like the other thing to think of as well is that people with disabilities aren't sort of just like a section of the community. Everyone is going to experience disability in their life. Everyone, like as we get older, you get to experience. So, like, you know,
you're pregnant.
Exactly. Like, so there's nobody, and like, that's an interesting thing because, like, I've been like, I remember going so many shops that I've gone into where, like, you know, I can't fit around the aisles, and then there'll be a mum pushing a pram. And like giving knowing looks to each other because we know exactly what's going on in the shop. It's like so everyone's going to experience disability. So it's not like something that you can really escape from. So stop ignoring it. Really.
Yeah, exactly. And it's that cognitive empathy piece of going, oh, that's right. I know what it's like to have a broken leg or to not be able to waddle from my car to the shop. Because of the other people on board that I had with me. Or when you do have, let's say, an ear infection and you can't hear so good.
Yeah, exactly.
Whatever it is, but really going, oh, that's right. When I'm in that situation, I'd like people to actually treat me like a human being and make some allowances for me.
Yeah. So there was one thing, because talking about like what businesses should do and one of the things that they shouldn't do, and this is one talked about on LinkedIn from my microaggressions post. Someone commented about the tokenistic exercises, like for example, where they'll give someone a wheelchair and say, "Hey, sit in this for an hour," and then you'll be able to see what it's like being in a wheelchair. Well, guess what? No, you can't. You know, like that. So avoiding all that kind of stuff is. Yeah,
that cognitive stuff. Yeah,
exactly. It's like that's not going to teach you what it's really like.
No, because unless you have that underlying compassionate empathy piece of sharing and understanding the feelings of another person and responding appropriately, if you go straight into cognitive empathy of I know what it's like to be you, you can come across as a bit of a dick.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And then that's going to get my back up because I'm just like, no, you don't.
No, you don't. You haven't listened.
That's very hard to engage with. I need to learn how to engage with someone who says that in a way that's like trying to correct them without getting angry kind of thing.
Yeah. And I suppose when we talk in this podcast a lot, we talk about empathy for particular professions and experiences, but we also talk about empathy from. So let's talk about that really quick. Do you get exhausted having to explain to people or people with good intentions? Do they mean to come across condescending? Do they mean to cause you harm? What's the empathy that we could have for people who get this just wrong?
Yeah, look, I mean, there are people who are condescending, and that's extremely rare. It's mainly just about wanting to be better. And yeah, it is really exhausting. I'll have days where I'm just like, I wish I could. My brain goes, I wish I could just go back to being totally ignorant about things, because I was ignorant about things. I wish I could go back to being ignorant about things, forget that, like, that I've got disability, stop talking about disability, because when you can't get the message across that you're trying to get across, that's really exhausting. Or when you see, when you see things and you're just like, I've just spoken about that and it's still not getting through. That's just like huge. And so it's very tiring, but then you realize that's the reason why you're still doing it.
Yeah. And I think it's important as well. I mean, from the comments that you get on LinkedIn, you've changed minds, you've opened some minds. Hopefully today we've done that as well. And I think that people need to learn that intention is not enough. You can have good intentions, but if you communicate it without empathy, you can actually do damage. And I think from your experience, you've explained that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, I love those conversations as well, because I'm learning stuff too. Like, it's amazing just some of the things, like, remember Stella Young? Like, so she was a disability activist and a comedian, and she passed away some years ago. But look her up on TEDx. She does this talk about I am not your inspiration, and about inspiration porn and stuff. And she is fantastic. When I listen to her, when I sort of started my business journey, and I just like, wow, she explains things so well. And really,
was it Stella Young? Did you say?
Yes, Stella Young. Yeah. And she just nailed it. And just so because of that, I was then sort of able to go, okay, well, if she can say this stuff, then I'm going to start being open too, because it's the only way to actually get things across.
Yeah. And I think with humour as well, we've got to look at humour with people and not humour at people. And really being aware of our language and our jokes and our humour. I mean, I remember the first introduction that I had was Steady Eddie.
Ah, yes, love Steady Eddie, yeah.
And he was hilarious, but you're allowed to laugh with him.
Yes.
You can't laugh at him.
Yeah.
And I think that's another thing that people can do, is when we check our humour, or when other people are making jokes about people with disabilities, then it's checking them as well and calling them on it, going, oh, not cool.
Yeah. It's so funny. It's like, I make jokes about having, like, I make jokes about myself. So look, one of the things that I do is powerlifting. So I do bench press. I obviously can't do the squat, deadlift, whatever. But so like I've got T-shirts with disability jokes on them, like, that I've made up. And people, when I wear them, people are like, should you be wearing that? And I'm like, I'm the one that's making the joke. Like, like, and I remember, like, being at the gym, and I cracked a joke about myself. And one of the guys goes, am I allowed to laugh at that? Just like, yes, you are. Like, I was like, please laugh, otherwise it's going to be like, very awkward. Yeah. So absolutely,
yeah. Thank you so much for today. I think our takeaways are to listen and treat people with disability as actual humans, because that is what they are. And one of the things that I say is, people are humans to be heard, not problems to be solved.
Yes.
So talking to people, listening to people, deferring to people, including people with disabilities of all different kinds, not generalizing, not making assumptions, not making expectations, not laughing at people, not designing for people, but being inclusive in everything that you do, and thinking, how might we do this better, but how might we engage someone to help us do this better?
Exactly right. Yeah. Because I've had so many people go, oh, can you have a look at this? And then, like, when I say this, it's way down the track, and they haven't had anybody look at it at the right moment. It's just like, oh, if you
and by then it's too expensive to change.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's like, yeah, well, sorry, we can't change it now because we've gone too far. And it's like, well, what was the point of getting me to have a look at it, you know? So,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. But I definitely think it's having conversations, it's listening
Absolutely.
to people, it's following people who have different experiences. So I follow Herspective, and she's all about intersectional feminism, Herspective feminism on Instagram, and Spencer to the West.
Spencer
And
to the West. Yes, I'm going to look him up because I haven't got that one.
he's so good. He's so good. It's opening our minds, opening our hearts, opening our ears, and really seeing people for more than just their disability. Ainslee, how can people find you?
Yeah, so ainsleehooper.com.au is my website. Ainslee Hooper Consulting on Instagram, Facebook, Ainslee Hooper Consulting. I'm on LinkedIn, Twitter, and I've also got a podcast which I've done one season of, Ainslee Hooper Chats with.
Awesome.
Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. I'm doing another season this year. The first one, it was about 10 things to know about people with disabilities. With a variety of guests, and this year is going to be about the experiences of COVID for people with disabilities.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, I'll put all the links in all the things so you can find Ainslee basically everywhere, it seems. Yeah. And you're based in Melbourne?
Yes, I'm based in Geelong. So my business, I do consulting online. Before even COVID hit, my consulting was going to. I had intended to be online. So yeah, basically I do most of it online. I can do some face-to-face stuff, but generally I do it online.
And I think the key for today is get our inclusion consultants in at the beginning of the project.
Yes,
not
absolutely.
At the end of the project.
Yeah, exactly right. Yep. So it's like, okay, have we got everybody's perspective? Have we got a person with a disability's perspective? No, then you need to do something about that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Ainslee, I wish you every success. Good luck getting your moon boot off tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ainslee. What a lovely discussion that was. And thank you for being so open about your experience. I definitely think that there was something in there for all of us to take away, how we can better interact with an open heart and an open mind to create homes and communities and businesses that are more inclusive for people with disabilities, because at the end of the day, like I said, people are humans to be heard, not problems to be solved. If you'd like to find Ainslee Hooper, she's on LinkedIn and Instagram and Twitter and on her website and her podcast, and I'll put all those links below. And you can find me, Leanne Butterworth, at empathyfirst.com.au or on social media, Empathy First HQ. As you know, I do empathy training in businesses and online to help create communities and workplaces where everybody feels heard, valued, and visible. My name's Leanne Butterworth, and that was the Empathy Podcast. I'll see you next time.